So one of the last videos that I created on how to create this Niagara fluid flamethrower effect, there was a question of how can you switch the Niagara fluid to be a higher quality when you render, when you use the movie render queue, rather than having it be that same quality in the viewport. So have it lower quality in the viewport, and then when you go to render, have it switch to higher quality. This is something we'd be able to do by exposing a parameter from our Niagara system and then adjusting that parameter through blueprints. Now, blueprints can get a little bit tricky. I find the toughest thing with blueprints when I kind of start diving into them is finding the right blueprint node to do the thing that you're wanting to do, and then how to actually use that node. But the good thing about blueprints is there's so much resources and information about them online that it makes a lot of that stuff kind of fairly easy to find out if you just spend a little bit of time with it. But I'll go over in this video of how to do that very simply, very quickly in this short video. So right now we have this FXS flamethrower effect, which is a Niagara fluid in Unreal 5. And what we're going to end up doing is keeping it low quality in the viewport, and then when we go to render or play the game, it'll swap to a higher quality. That way, when we're working on our scenes, it's not using up all of our memory on our GPU, and it will keep things fast and efficient and easy to work with. So what we'll do is we'll open up this effect, this flamethrower effect I have here, and under the Grid 3D gas emitter, this is the thing that's emitting the fluids, and under emitter summary, if I go to grid, I'll find that the resolution max axis is 200. So it's like 200 voxels or cells that's making up this kind of effect, which is quite heavy, uses a lot of GPU memory. So we're going to want to make this lower. So by default, I can type like 30 in here, and now it's really low quality, really fast to run. It's not using much memory on my GPU, or not as much memory. We want to have it like that in the viewport, and then when we go to render, maybe it swaps to 200 resolution or 150 resolution or something much higher. So to do that, we have to create a user parameter. So you'll see our effect system here, and you'll see this section called user parameters, and you can add a user parameter. So we're going to click plus, and we're going to add a parameter. Now, the type of parameter we have to add has to match that kind of box with the number that we're putting into it. So for something like resolution value, we don't want something with decimal places. We want whole numbers, solid full numbers. So we'll do an integer. So we'll do like int 32, which is a kind of a whole number, like 1, 2, 3, and so on. Not something like a float, which would be decimal places or point values. If you put in the wrong variable type, you might crash Unreal or freeze your computer. So you have to be a little bit careful with that. So I'll do it int 32. Now once I add that parameter, if I click on this effect system, I'll see it pop up here under user parameters. So there it is, new Niagara int 32, and I'll rename that to something like render res. So maybe render resolution. Now you have to be very careful here. If I left that at 0 and plug this into that resolution value, it would probably freeze my computer or crash Unreal. So you have to be really careful. We have to put a base value in there first. Otherwise, we're probably going to get a problem. So I'm going to put something like 30 in there. That's kind of what we currently have for this. But what we have to do now is go make that kind of voxel resolution equal this variable that we created, this parameter, instead of just a number that we have right now. So once we have this user render res parameter created and we set it to 30, we can go over to our grid 3D gas. We can go to our grid section for resolution max axis. Instead of just using a number, we're going to reference that variable or that parameter that we created. So we'll click down on this arrow and we'll just search user dot, and then we'll find user render res. And if we click on that, it now replaces this with a link to our variable or to our parameter. So now we have it saying it's going to use that variable, and if we check here, that variable is currently set to 30, so this is what we get, and now we'll save this. So now it's using that variable to define the resolution. Now what we're going to do is we save our effect system now, and through a blueprint, we're going to change that variable to a higher number when the game begins playing or when we start rendering. So right now, if we click play, it stays at that low quality. What we're going to do is add a blueprint, you could do this in many different ways, but to keep it simple, we'll just do it in our level blueprint. So I'm going to go here on this drop down and go to our open level blueprint. And in our level blueprint, I'll create an event. That event will be event begin play. So when the game begins playing or when it begins rendering, we'll create this event begin play. And then what we're going to do is create a node to set that integer parameter. So the node we want to create is called setIntParameter. And when you type it in, you won't see it pop up. But if you turn off this context sensitive, then you'll see it appear. And you have to be very careful which one you create. Like if I go here, hey, this sounds like what I need to use, Niagara set int parameter. But if I hover over that, it says target is a Niagara parameter collection instance. That's not what I want. I actually want this one here under effects, components, particle system, set int parameter. Target is effects system component. That's the one I want. That's the one that will connect to my effects system in this case for how we're going to set it up. So you have to be careful. There might be a lot of nodes with the same name, but they'll actually reference different inputs. So in this case, we want to create this one here under effects, components, particle system, set int parameter. So we'll create that node. We'll need a target. That's the Niagara system that we're wanting to change the parameter of, and then we have to specify the parameter name and then the new value that we want to change it to. So in this case, we want to change that render as value to something like 150. And parameter name, we know it's user.renderRes. We have to make sure it's spelled the same. I think that's how I spelled it, but we'll find out very easily and very soon. So that's what I believe the variable name was, and then the value is 150 that we want to switch it to when we play our game. So now target, we have to connect it to that Niagara system. To do that, we have to create a variable that links to our Niagara system. So we're going to add a variable here. That variable we'll just call Niagara fluid. Type of variable in this case is not Boolean. Boolean would be like a true or false value. We want it to be our Niagara system, so we'll search Niagara, and you'll see there's a bunch of Niagara things here. The one we want is Niagara actor, and we want to do an object reference. So if we do Niagara actor, object reference, now that's the type. We can drag this into our blueprint and say get Niagara fluid, so get the value of this. And then what we can do is plug that into our target. It'll automatically create a node in between. And then we have to link this Niagara fluid here to our actual effect system. So we'll select it. And on the right-hand side over here, you'll have a drop-down where you can select it. You won't see it by default. You have to click compile first. Then it'll appear. So now here it'll say Niagara fluid. It's set to none. We'll drop it down. We'll select our FXS flamethrower. That's a system that we want to use for our Niagara fluid variable. And then we want to change that Niagara fluid's parameter called user.renderRes to a new value of 150 when we play our game. So now what we'll do is we'll click compile, make sure it shows a check and that everything's good to go. We'll save our level blueprint. We'll close it. So resolution looks pretty bad. When we click play, there we go. It swaps to higher quality. So now if you were to have something enabled like the render movie queue, so under edit plugins, if you want to load that, it's the render movie render queue. You can enable it and that'll give you a bunch of tools and things to render out your gameplay or your mini cutscene with different render layers and other things. So by enabling that, we have this Windows Cinematics movie render queue, and you can add a render job. So first of all, I created a sample sequence here in advance, which is just this Cinecam right here, just added. So if I take a look at that, it looks like something like this. So that's what we're going to render out. So I'm going to go here to Windows, Cinematics, Movie Render Queue, add our render job, which is going to be that kind of sample sequence that I made. Sure, that path looks okay. Render locally. So it's a low quality here, but when I go to render, what does it do? Well, it swaps it to a higher resolution and it renders it out. So there we go. Now we can change our Niagara fluid quality on render or on gameplay and have it at a lower value in the viewport. Hopefully this helps anyone out who's doing any cinematics or cutscenes or just wanting to work with their level a little bit easier and not use heavy settings on their effects until they play a game or until they render it out.